لا إله إلا الله 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 لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله سيدنا محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. We're reading in the link that's just been shared, invocations after the dawn prayer. The Arabic's on page 133. Transliteration is on page 134 in that version. There's some other versions, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alif Lam Mim. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون
والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون وإلهكم إله واحد لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أقدم إليك بين يدي كل نفس ولمحة ولحظة وقطرة وطرفة يطوف بها أهل السماوات والأرض وكل شيء هو في علمك كائن أو قد كان. أقدم إليك بين يدي ذلك كله. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء. وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض
ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم.
لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإن تبدوا ما في
أنفسكم أو تخفوه يحاسبكم به الله فيغفر لمن يشاء ويعذب من يشاء
والله على كل شيء قدير.
آمن الرسول بما
أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كلنا آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. آمين. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة أولو العلم قائما بالقسط لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. وأنا أشهد بما شهد الله به وأشهد الله على ذلك وأستودع الله هذه الشهادة وهي لي عند الله وديعة أسأله حفظها حتى يتوفاني عليها. إن عند الله الإسلام. قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير. تولج الليل في النهار وتولج النهار في الليل وتخرج الحي من الميت وتخرج الميت من الحي وترزق من تشاء بغير حساب. رحمن الدنيا والآخرة ورحيمهما تعطي من تشاء منهما وتمنع من تشاء. أنت ترحمنا فارحمنا رحمة تغنينا بها عن رحمة من سواك. اللهم اقض عنا الدين واغننا من الفقر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Omar, and all who are present online. We are on page 145 for the word of Sayyidina Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Salim, as well as 146 in the transliteration. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
اللهم يا عظيم
عظيم
السلطان يا قديم
قديم
الإحسان
الإحسان.
يا دائم النعم يا كثير الجود يا واسع العطاء يا خفي اللطف يا جميل الصنع يا حليم لا يعجل. صل يا ربي على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم وارض عن الصحابة أجمعين. اللهم لك الحمد شكرا ولك المن فضلا وأنت ربنا حقا ونحن عبيدك رقا وأنت لم تزل لذلك أهلا. يا ميسر كل عسير ويا جابر كل كسير ويا صاحب كل فريد ويا مغني كل فقير ويا مقوي كل ضعيف ويا مأمن كل مخيف. يسر علينا كل عسير فتيسير العسير عليك يسير. اللهم يا من لا يحتاج إلى البيان والتفسير حاجاتنا كثير وأنت عالم بها وخبير. اللهم إني أخاف منك وأخاف ممن يخاف منك وأخاف ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق من يخاف منك نجنا ممن لا يخاف منك. اللهم بحق سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم حسنا بعينك التي لا تنام واكنفنا بكنفك الذي لا يرام وارحمنا بقدرتك علينا فلا نهلك وأنت ثقتنا ورجاؤنا.
وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله
وصحبه
وصحبه وسلم.
والحمد لله رب العالمين
عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. اللهم إنا نسألك زيادة في الدين
وبركة في العمر وصحة في الجسد وسعة في الرزق وتوبة قبل الموت وشهادة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت وعفوا عند الحساب وأمانا من العذاب ونصيبا من الجنة. ارزقنا النظر إلى وجهك الكريم. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته.
ببركاتهم وأنوارهم ونفحاتهم وظلمهم في الدين والدنيا. وإلى حضرة النبي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are on page 151, heading Word Latif of Imam Abdullah al-Haddad. The Arabic follows 152. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qul huwa Allahu ahad Allahu samad.
لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون. أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون. تعالى الله الملك الحق لا إله إلا هو رب العرش الكريم. ومن يدع مع الله إلها آخر لا برهان له به إنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون. وقل رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين. فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون له الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون. يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي وكذلك تخرجون. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. تلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. والله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة وهو الرحمن الرحيم. والله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر. سبحان الله عما يشركون. والله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى وهو العزيز الحكيم. سلام على نوح في العالمين إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إنه من عبادنا المؤمنين. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق تامات من شر ما خلق. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. ومن أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع
خلقك أنك أنت الله
لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافي مزيدا. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. رضيت بالله ربا بالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا ربا بالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا رضيت بالله ربا بالإسلام دينا وسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت هو رب العرش العظيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت من شر ما صنعت أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت عليك توكلت وأنت رب العرش العظيم ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما اللهم إني أعوذ بك من شر نفسي تأخذ من ناصيتها إن ربي على صراط مستقيم يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث ومن عذابك أستجير أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي ولا إلى أحد من خلقك طرفة عين اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن وأعوذ بك من العجز والكسل وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة أسألك العفو والعافية المعافاة الدائمة في ديني ودنياي وأهلي ومالي اللهم استر عوراتي وامن روعاتي اللهم احفظني من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن شمالي ومن فوقي وأعوذ بعظمتك أن أغتال من تحتي اللهم أنت خلقتني وأنت تهديني وأنت تطعمني وأنت تسقيني وأنت تميتني وأنت تحييني وأنت على كل شيء قدير أصبحنا على فطرة الإسلام وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين اللهم بك أصبحنا وبك أمسينا وبك نحيا وبك نموت وعليك نتوكل وإليك النشور أصبحنا وأصبح الملك لله والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم وخير ما فيه وخير ما قبله وخير ما بعده وأعوذ بك من شر هذا اليوم وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده اللهم ما أصبح بي من نعمة أو بأحد من خلقك فمنك وحدك لا شريك لك لك الحمد ولك الشكر على ذلك سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه مداد كلماته حمدي عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه مداد كلماته سبحان الله وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه مداد كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه مداد كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه مداد كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه كلماته سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه مداد كلماته سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في السماء سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض عدد ما بين ذلك سبحان الله عدد ما هو خالق الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في السماء الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في الأرض الحمد لله عدد ما بين ذلك الحمد لله عدد ما هو خالق لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في السماء لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض لا إله إلا الله عدد ما بين ذلك لا إله إلا الله عدد ما هو خالق وأكبر عدد ما خلق في السماء الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في الأرض الله أكبر عدد ما بين ذلك الله أكبر عدد ما هو خالق لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في السماء لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في الأرض ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما بين ذلك لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما هو خالق لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك له الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك له الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له يحيي ويميت على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله بعلم الله وصلاة وسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله وصلاة وسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله وصلاة وسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله صاحبي عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. عدد خلقه ومسألة عرش ميزان كلماته
ومداد كلماته. You're up. Take this and give it to Shoaib bin Ishaq and Muhammad Bah. And one more for Abu Abdul-Rahman. Pass this to Abu Abdul-Rahman. Assalamu alaikum. To those online, they're going to turn off video. If you're able to turn video off for 1 minute, please do. You just click stop cam or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how it works. We're doing an adjustment to the camera. What happened? Yeah, makes sense. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsan ila yawm ad-din wa alayna ma'ahum wa fihim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Bismillah. So we are continuing in Manners in the Deen by Al-Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah. And we took the manners of someone possessing learning, Adabul Alim, and today the Imam will remind us of some adab of al-muta'allim ma'al alim. So what does this mean? This means etiquettes of someone acquiring knowledge with the one possessing knowledge from whom they're acquiring it. So these are essentially manners of a seeker of knowledge. And those will differ sometimes dramatically from one region to another. And some of them will be somewhat regionally specific. They may be specific to people that are more urbanized and less urbanized. They may have some cultural idiosyncrasies of a given area. They may have madhab idiosyncrasies. So sometimes these lists of etiquettes of the seekers of knowledge, they can't be applied literally in every context. A general understanding and posture of adab should be adopted, and then there will be specifics that relate to time and place. And for example, now using cameras, using microphones, using computers, all of those things are things that didn't exist in the past. People didn't have phones in the past. All of those things, at a certain point, people were using inkwells, pens and inkwells, for example. All of those are going to have an effect. But a lot of these are just a general theme of etiquette. Bismillah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم رضي الله عنكم. يبدأه بالسلام ويقل بين يديه الكلام.
Bismillah. So these first two etiquettes relate to speech. One of them, so with respect to one's teachers, meaning those from whom one takes knowledge, it's an etiquette to endeavor to initiate the greeting of salams. And that's an etiquette, for example, with someone younger to someone senior to them. And there's a seniority in the relationship by virtue of one acquiring knowledge from the other that applies there. However, many times those that are more learned are of more taqwa and closeness to Allah and following of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Thank you. So, for example, we used to live in the neighborhood of a Sheikh Bouti, rahimahullah, in Damascus. And he would pass like an alleyway. There's a street that ended in an alleyway, or intersected an alleyway, and the alleyway ended at the street, and then would go up the hill to where his mosque was. So he would pass the alley where my house was, and I'd be headed to pray at his mosque, and he'd be on the way to lead prayers at the mosque. And one of the things I noticed about, two things I noticed about him walking to Salatul Fajr. One, I could never beat him in giving salams. He would always beat me. And two, he'd be doing al-baqiyat as-salihat as he walked to Salah. He'd be saying, Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. And I've seen that with some of my other teachers, that you'll try to give them salams first, but they'll beat you. And that's ittiba the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But from the side of the student, so initiating salams, initiating a handshake, coming up to someone, all of that there's a humility there, and there's also extending oneself. There's extending oneself, and that is adab. That is adab. Even if one's teachers beat one should endeavor to extend oneself and humble oneself. And Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, and this is a general theme in the etiquettes of a seeker of knowledge, he said, "Dhuliltu taliban fa'uziztu matluban." I humbled myself when I sought knowledge, and I was elevated when I was sought. And that's mujarrab, that's tried and true, that al-birru salaf, al-birru salaf, and that translates loosely as goodness is alone, particularly in relationships of parents. And the relationship between a teacher and a student is similar to that of a parent and a child. So teachers have like a spiritual, religious parentage, and showing goodness and adab in that relationship, that hails of adab being shown to that person later on. There's one brother who really asa adab when we were seeking knowledge from an English-speaking country. Sheikh Ibrahim Mosief and I were just talking about this recently, and he someone explained to him what happened, and he had done something that was out of bounds, and he said, "Oh yeah, I did this," and he didn't realize that it was out of bounds. So someone that was like senior to him, but closer in age than the teacher he had shown poor manners with, he said, "You know what he said to you, what he allowed for you, he allowed that when you eventually begin teaching, that one of the students is going to treat you like that." That's what just happened. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. Sometimes little things will happen where someone will be out of bounds, and I'll wonder, which of my teachers did I act that way with, such that Allah sallatahu alayya, that Allah afflicted me with this type of behavior. So one should endeavor to show adab And for example, and it's a good analogy that might be closer to some of our experience than the etiquettes among seekers of knowledge, is like a dojo or an army. Preserving certain formalities, it creates an environment where knowledge is properly passed. And in those cases, it creates an environment of safety, and it creates an environment of formality so that learning can continue. And actually, so there's also, with certain people that you become very close to, there's a departure from takalluf. That'll differ from putting on, going to excess and putting on undue formality. There's a departure from that with your ikhwan that you become very close to. But actually, in the case of student and teacher relationships, and those that are immediately in proximity to them, actually those that are close have a higher standard of adab that are demanded because of the proximity. So, for example, if you keep the company of shuyukh and ulama, their closest servants have extreme adab, because otherwise proximity becomes a veil to benefit, and people begin to take things for granted, and then that reduces the benefit of the student. And if students are around and they take the environment for granted and they act too informal, it will also reduce the benefit of others who come. So you find, for example, the companions of Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara, radiyallahu anhum, they had a level of adab that was they were charged with beyond others, to the extent of not even being allowed to ask questions. So at a certain point, the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't have them ask questions, and they would be glad if like an A'rabi came and asked questions. And they had so much adab that the Prophet ﷺ didn't even have doors on some of his houses. He had curtains. So he was still able to have enough privacy, and literally he didn't even need a door, and he didn't need a doorman. And that's because of the intense adab they had. And that should be understood. And especially for North Americans, when people crossed the Atlantic, they were fleeing certain things, and it's a certain type of personality that will travel to a new land and settle it, certain type of frontier type personality, and they left aside certain etiquettes of the old world, and as a societal characteristic, there's a reduced level of protocol and etiquette on this side of the Atlantic from the opposite. If you travel to the east, one of the things you see are a level of protocol that is a level of protocol that's beyond that here. So we have to work at adopting certain protocols, but they essentially preserve a reverence in the environment, and preserve feelings, and someone who is in an environment continually showing su'ul adab, gradually an inversion of hearts will occur, and that prevents benefit. So some of those we should be conscious of that, and observing those who have a lot of adab will help us imbibe it. And in our close proximity, the students of Sheikh Fakhr al-Islam grew up seeking knowledge, and he's someone with a lot of humility and adab himself. We can benefit from them. That's honestly why some certain gatherings will put them in responsible positions, because they understand basics. I remember Hafiz Mohsen, when he was here, at a certain point, we would wear shoes into the building because the rugs were barely down. For example, some might just walk and take off their shoes, so their shoes were ahead of the imam. But if you look closely, he would remove his shoes or walk to the side, so the shoes were from the back of where you pray. And that's a subtlety, but it's a subtlety of someone that's been trained, right? It's not adab, for example, to put shoes in front of. someone who's praying, to face shoes to someone, face feet directly to someone when sitting, certain basic things, and there's a benefit in that. An underlying theme of that is deference, love and deference, and reverence. Those are underlying themes of adab, and couple things that will help with North Americans in this regard. One is habituating humility, deference, avoiding entitlement, and if one, you could say treating others as if they're of a higher rank than yourself. Habituating that, and that's generally speaking. For example, your children, obviously that's not the case, but it's better to err on the side of caution. It's better to err on the side of caution. And all of that is preserving a certain environment that allows benefit to flow and prevents harm, and especially in proximity. For example, some of our shuyukh, because of being a translator, I might have to translate a medical appointment, right? So if you're translating a medical appointment, you're going to know details about that person that are of the purview of confidentiality, right? Like their birthday, their passport, holding their passport for them so you know somebody's birthday. But personally speaking, I never felt privy to divulge any of that to anyone, right? That would have been a violation. But if one's in a position like that, if, for example, if you serve someone's house, you're going to see their personal effects, see their personal space. If you're not someone who retains an element of formality, you might see personal flaws or personal things that someone would be shy about, and you have to overlook them and not divulge them elsewhere. And all of that requires adab. So, for example, one of the things that's really azim about Anas bin Malik is the proximity he had with the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, and the Prophet ﷺ not having to censure him. And that's someone with a lot of adab. And that's his teacher was a murabbi that was able to impart that, such that he embodied that. Allahu Akbar. So humility and deference, lowering one's gaze from people's faults, and also a lot of Islamic etiquettes relate to doing things in a way that's communal. Something else that we'll have to strive, those of us that were educated and reared in North America, is, as I believe I stated already, avoiding entitlement, and also avoiding things that are too like related to individualism, as opposed to a collective, and deference to a collective. Those things are underlying things that we'll have to work on. Allahu Akbar. So that's first to begin salam, to initiate salams. And next, not to speak a lot in front of him. And that is a general etiquette. That's an etiquette in the books of child rearing as well. Younger people, not to speak a lot in the presence of elders. And that obviously doesn't mean if they ask you or asking about how they are, or greeting them with salams, or offering them things, but just side conversations in the presence of seniors many times are a departure from adab, and the posture is more listening and responding. And nowadays, as stated in some other gatherings, that there's the element of texting and the element of phone conversations. And for example, some of those who served Sayyidi Habib Omar closely and would oftentimes ride with him, I might call them and I'd know they were with Habib Omar because they would talk very, very low on the phone if they picked it up. And if I called, it'd be associated with something like, how do I find you all? Where are you? Trying to catch up to them for something we were all doing. So they understood that was important. They might take the call, but they would keep their voices subdued. And again, just like a level of formality and being prepared to benefit. In the case of a teacher, it's being listening and being prepared to benefit. And an example of that was even beyond speech. Beyond speech. A Shafi'i would gently turn pages to avoid making the rustling sound of a page in the majlis of Imam Malik. Right? He would turn the pages delicately. And he was very young. He was very young, teenager when he studied with Imam Malik, but he had extreme adab, and through adab we benefit. Some of the shuyukh and the righteous, they do not allow worldly talk in their majlis. So, like in their majlis, and this is at home even, like in their diwan, in the masjid, that would be bila kalam. Bila kalam in the masjid. That's just a period. But for example, in their majlis, they wouldn't allow worldly talk. So like the stock market fell, or this sale happened, or this property was purchased, or this or that. That's not the place for those people through whom we connect to for the sake of the hereafter. And in activities. La ilaha illallah. Bismillah.
ويقوم له إذ قام
إذا قام
ولا يقول له قال فلان خلف ما
خلافة
ما قلت.
So he said, it is from an etiquette to stand for the alim when he stands, and that will be somewhat society specific. That will be somewhat society specific, to stand for elders and their arrival and their departure. And that's what he's saying. And again, that's somewhat societal specific, and some of them may order one not to stand. And also that may differ with respect to what's happening. For example, if an alim arrives to a majlis that's not his majlis, it's always already taking place, it's not necessarily etiquette to stand up from the majlis. It'd be somewhat case specific and societal specific. And not to say so-and-so says this that differs from your position. So what is that saying? That's saying that one may study with multiple teachers. And not to cite one to the contrary of the other, but just gain benefit from each. And that's hada qawl fulan wa that qawl fulan. And specifically that one, that may be isa'ah to both of them, because it places them in a position of critiquing the position of the other. Right? Oh, Google says this. Google says this. You said that, but Google says this. Allahu Akbar, which is about where we're at societally. But inshallah, we could raise the bar. La ilaha illallah. Bismillah.
ولا يسأل جلسيه في مجلسه.
If you notice also something I've written wrong there, tell me so we can correct it. وَلَا يَسَلُ جَلِيسَهُ فِي مَجْلِسِهِ. What does that mean? The student should not ask his or her neighbor a question during the lesson. So meaning side conversations. If there's a question, they should ask the teacher. Or they could ask after the lesson. But side conversations during the lesson are a departure from adab. And I don't mean by this in any stretch to pick on anyone, but I've noticed in lessons, there's a lot of side conversations among the female students during the lesson. Maybe because some of them are shy to ask themselves, but we don't prefer that. If they're shy to raise their voice or raise their hand, they could pass it as a note. But side conversations, because then you have one thing that's obvious is you're not able to listen and talk at the same time. So the next point, if you're busy talking about the previous point among yourselves, the next point you're going to miss. And then also it's distracting to others. And it's very distracting as someone who's lecturing if there's conversations taking place in front of you. Unfortunate. And also that applies to text, right? You're trying to talk, and ideally as a teacher, you're trying to have some read of your audience, and there's an exchange between the audience. So if one is you watch facial expressions, body language, and those are indicative of understanding and attention, especially if you're dealing with younger students. So if people are busy texting, that body language is saying that you're not even involved, right? And something else is more important. And then there's definitely concern about what's understood. So that should be avoided.
ولا يبتسم عند مخاطبته.
La ilaha illallah. And he's saying not smiling when addressing him. That may be somewhat case specific, and generally you'll see that there's a posture of reverence and a posture of heba. It's difficult to translate, but it means awe, and a posture of formality. So sometimes retaining a more serious disposition is more given to that context, but that's not entirely specific. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would joke with his companions, and our shuyukh and some shuyukh are very jovial, and especially in a social context, responding appropriately to that context is more adab. So this isn't across the board, but we will say that internally we do, and by that we mean among close servers and workers, some of the undue joking around needs to be subdued, particularly, and I hate to say it in a majlis when they're present, it's unbecoming among servers of the dawah to make jokes about ladies or any jokes where there's innuendos involved. And in the presence of teachers and the dawah, we don't want to have that. Al-batta, entirely that should be left out. Entirely that should be left out, inshallah ta'ala. And even some of the joking, if in an environment of like suluk and ilm, very few people can get away with being a joker, right? You can't get away with being a joker. It's a level of meaning someone that's will always doing it, never taking anything serious. That person has to be like a muhib and a majdub to get away with it, right? And there are some people that are just beloved, and it's a disposition they have, and they can get away with it, and they're actually a little majdub, those type of people. Other than them, you're not going to get away with it. What's going to happen is repercussions and consequences that distance, that create distance. And we'll remind that the etiquettes of the rulings associated with jest are that it be truthful, it not hurt feelings, and it be not be excessive. And in the case of internally, some of the joking around it goes beyond the last two, right? If everything becomes a joke, we always got to crack a joke. And again, that might be a cultural thing and a contextual thing, but like if someone were an ambassador, or someone were a governor, or someone were a CEO, or someone were a sergeant, or someone is in an environment of seeking knowledge and reverence, that's not the environment for that. If you want to be in a different environment, go ahead. But if you want to be in this environment, it's not the environment for always cracking jokes. Like it's, and again, except that rare person, it's that muhib, like Nu'ayman, right? There was a joker in the community of the Prophet Muhammad SAW who could get away with it. But you see, like some of the stuff he did was like Majdub. Yeah. Like that guy's muhib, Majdub. He can get away with it. The likes of Anas wouldn't have gotten away with it. Anas, Bilal, Ibn Mas'ud. And those are imams, right? Those are imams from whom knowledge was taken and adab was taken. He was a joker among the Sahaba. He could get away with it. And they have a function in a collective. But too much, if it's too much or it hurts feelings, then it is reprehensible, not praiseworthy. And again, that we're talking about in formal settings of seekers of knowledge, travelers to Allah, close workers in the dawah. Now, with the public that we receive, the opposite is the case, right? Should be very lighthearted, and though respectfully lighthearted, not to the lighthearted that we're poking fun at people, not to the lighthearted, not to the point that we're poking fun at people. And this may require a little bit of a cultural adjustment for some of us. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And so they should receive a whole lot of smiles, whole lot of smiles, suitable jest, and lightheartedness, flavoring the speech, like we use salt to flavor food to its proper threshold and in the proper dishes, inshallah ta'ala, and it makes things palatable. So we, again, and a differing etiquette with differing populations, that's just something that we have to realize exists in the Sunnah. And we should adopt that, and we should teach that. So again, those who dwelled in Medina, they had different demands on them than those who just visited. Those who just visited might come with a long list of questions, and those who dwelled at a certain point were asked not to ask questions. And you can bet that those that frequented the homes of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, it was even stricter, right? That proximity warrants additional adab, so that departure from it does not result in distancing of hearts. La ilaha illallah. Naam.
ولا يشير عليه بخلاف رأيه.
Naam. So that means in the context of shura, don't give shura contradicting the position of one's teacher, and that's in the context of a teacher of knowledge and a teacher of tarbiyah. Otherwise, in certain contexts, provided the delivery is suitable, we find that the companions would give shura to the Prophet ﷺ, right? Like in the Battle of Badr. Naam.
ولا يأخذ بثوبه إذا قام.
Allahu alam, he means like if you need to speak to him, don't tug on his garment, right? Don't tug on them. Say, excuse me, say it. I had this to say, right? Someone's not facing you, to tug them, to get their attention. There's an irreverence there. Yeah.
ولا يستفهمه عن مسألة في عن مسألة في طريقه حتى يبلغ.
Is it you got feta?
يبلغ إلى منزله.
Yeah. ولا يستفهمه عن مسألة في طريقه حتى يبلغ إلى منزله. So he's saying if you're walking with the teacher, don't ask them while they're walking until they get to the place where they settle. Meaning, ask in appropriate context where they have attention. Now they're walking, got their back to you from across the room. All of that, that's not likely to have the most focus. and there's an Isa there. And you're asking about the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So it's something that warrants suitable context and attention.
ولا يكثر عليه عند ملاله.
And if they, melal is like if the person becomes tired. It can have the implication of bored, but not meaning bored, but like it's gone too long, not to continue to ask a lot when they're obviously, they're no longer focused, right? Don't wear them out. And one paces one's questions. That's what it's saying. Pacing one's questions and one's conversation. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sahbihi wa sallam. This is Al-Adab fi Deen by Imam Ghazali. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, there are longer works and other works, and some of them are more regionally specific, right? They might be specific to a certain tradition. Like some traditions will put the condition upon seekers of knowledge that they sit, like Bilal sitting and Ishaq, sit in iftirash. That might be a condition, whereas others aren't as strict on that. So some of those are regionally specific, but the point is just a posture that preserves affection and does not remove formality to the extent that benefit is lost and things are taken for granted. A posture of reverence, a posture of humility and deference. All of those are from the posture of a student. And there'll be certain expressions of that and certain things. And also is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the companions that were, long time students and close to him. That's the also of this. And there's a substantial portion of etiquettes of seeking knowledge in the story of Al-Khadr and Musa alayhi salam. And alhamdulillah, one will find it with the Sahaba as well, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. And one will find it in books of Imam Ghazali like this. There's a portion in Bidayat al-Hidayah. Imam al-Nawawi has a in the introduction of Al-Majmu'ah, which is his commentary on Al-Muhaddab. There's a lengthy discussion of that, adab of al-alim wal-muta'allim. And other places one will find it. Some are translated. And again, some will be somewhat regionally specific. Some of them will be regionally specific. But there's general themes related to it that we could work on, inshallah ta'ala. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us al-akhlaq and al-adab and khairul lutf and afiyah. And we ask, and there's a question online, if one goes outside of bounds, if one's able, definitely one should apologize if possible. And that is that you will see that discussed in Abu Madian's poem that begins Ma ladhatul aishi illa suhbatul fuqara. And actually beyond just apologizing for a specific overstep, that is a general posture of a seeker. So he says, وَحُتَّ رَأْسَكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ بِلَا سَبَبٍ وَقُمْ عَلَى قَدَمِ الْإِنصَافِ مُعْتَذِرًا. And that's the point. وَقُمْ عَلَى قَدَمِ الْإِنصَافِ مُعْتَذِرًا. So it's a line in that poem. It's a well-known poem. It's a poem on etiquettes of a traveler of the spiritual path that begins with the phrase, Ma ladhatul aishi illa suhbatul fuqara. The sweetness of life is only in the company of the poor, which means disciples, seekers and disciples. And the line is, put your head down, seek forgiveness without cause, and stand a footing of taking the self to account and apology. So those last three, wastaghfir bila sababin. So the posture of someone traveling to Allah is to always seek forgiveness. Seek forgiveness without any known cause. Seek forgiveness for one's state. They seek forgiveness for good deeds. If you look at the poetry of the righteous in istighfar, also this poem, this istighfar, the istighfar of from our shuyukh that's read at the end of the night of Sheikh Muhammad al-Haddar, Habib Muhammad al-Haddar, he does istighfar from mandub, istighfar from good dudes, istighfar from the sunnah prayers that we do. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, Assalamu alaikum, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. So seeking forgiveness from good deeds, much less bad deeds. And then stand a footing of taking oneself to account. Insaf is like to be fair against yourself, which is the opposite of entitlement. Entitlement, you're expecting something from someone. Insaf is like you're constantly feeling that something is expected from you that you've got to give. So that's a posture. And then seeking pardon. So you'll find afwan, they'll say. Afwan minkum. Constantly asking for pardon. And again, some of those should be internal states, not necessarily open statements with the masses. So for example, they told a story of like somebody who's so in a student in a seminary before his shuyukh and fellow students, he might give a talk, right? A lecture. And this before the internet, when context collapsed. The internet collapses context because things are going to maybe potentially the world simultaneously. Those present with you in the world simultaneously. But without collapsed context, a student speaking in the presence of his teachers and fellow students, that's a context. Whereas if that student goes out and becomes the one who delivers the Friday sermon, that's another context. He's the Imam of Jummah in that one context, whereas the other, he's a seeker among seekers and scholars. So they told us, for example, like if you go out, you're going out to villages where it's just, farmers, laborers, tradesmen, business people, just regular people. A student, if they're in at their seminary and their teacher asks them to speak, they might begin their speech. It's not for the faqir to speak in the presence of the ulama. Ma kana lil faqir an yatakallam fi hadrat al ulama. The needy poor slave shouldn't speak in the presence of the learned, but I was ordered to, so I'm speaking. But they said, if you go out on dawah to a village, right, you're dealing with regular, everyday people, don't start, oh, well, I'm not knowledgeable. It's not suitable that I speak. They'll be like, why am I listening to you? If you don't know anything, then I'm not going to listen. The masses aren't going to, it's a different context. So some of this that we've just said about standing on a posture of insaf, mu'tadir, always apologizing, that is in a specific context and an internal state, not necessarily every environment. And those of us that engage the masses, some of those etiquettes should remain internal or manifest differently than they do in environments with our teachers and seeking knowledge in seminaries. And Allah knows best. And Allah knows best. And please recite Fatiha, seeking from Allah sincere, accepted works, beneficial knowledge, good teaching, calling and guidance. That Allah be pleased with us. Please the Prophet Muhammad, Allahumma salli sallam wa barakatuh alayhi, and that the reward of the Fatiha we recite go to our parents, teachers, sheikhs, anyone we owe rights, and the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Al-Fatiha.